Tyrion Lannister entered the world as a mistake his father would never forgive. In A Song of Ice and Fire, few characters are born into privilege, yet treated with such disdain. Tyrion's life begins not in triumph, but in tragedy. His mother, Joanna Lannister, dies giving birth to him. Her death becomes the lens through which his father, Tywin Lannister, views him forever after. Tywin was a man built from iron pride and absolute control, and the one moment he could not control, the death of the one woman he truly loved, became bound inseparably to the child who survived. From the very beginning, Tyrion is a wound that never healed. Casterly Rock, the ancient seat of House Lannister, is a palace carved from a mountain. Its endless halls, carved staircases, and cavernous depths symbolize the grandeur and dominion of the Westerlands. But to a dwarf child, its magnificence only intensified his isolation. The rock is a fortress designed for giants, not for a boy with short legs, a heavy head, and a body that ached when pushed too far. Where Jaime and Cersei walked tall in golden light, Tyrion grew up in shadows. His siblings were born with the beauty and grace expected of Lannisters. Jaime, golden-haired and shining, was the ideal son. Cersei was fierce, clever, and beautiful, a lioness from birth. Tyrion, by contrast, reminded everyone of the fragility of their world. He was short, his limbs mismatched, his eyes different colors, his face warped. For a family obsessed with image, he was a humiliation. The servants whispered. The maids crossed themselves. Some said he was a punishment from the gods. Others said he was cursed. What made it worse was that Tyrion understood every word. Even as a child, he was brilliant. His mind grew quickly, sharper than the swords his father forged alliances with. He could read earlier than most high-born children, and devoured books with a hunger that startled even the Meisters. But the more he grew intellectually, the more the world reminded him that no amount of knowledge could compensate for a monstrous appearance. In Tyrion's earliest memories, warmth is scarce. Cersei despised him from the start, believing he had stolen their mother from her. Her cruelty was not the casual disgust others showed. It was personal, sharpened through years of resentment. She mocked him, tormented him, and never lost an opportunity to remind him that he was lesser. Jaime, however, offered a glimmer of kindness. He treated Tyrion with gentleness, though often from a polite distance. As Tyrion grew older, he would cling to these small acts of affection, storing them like coins in a purse otherwise empty. He adored Jaime, perhaps even idealized him, but Jaime's kindness was intermittent, never enough to shield Tyrion from the world's truth. Beauty is power, and he had neither. Tywin, meanwhile, oscillated between cold tolerance and quiet rage. He could not bring himself to acknowledge Tyrion as a full son, nor could he disown him without scandal. Instead, he kept Tyrion at arm's length, feeding him, clothing him, educating him, but withholding the one thing Tyrion desired most: recognition. This toxic mixture of disdain and necessity shaped Tyrion's personality. Denied love, he learned to seek respect. Denied respect, he learned to seek amusement. Wine became a shield. Wit became a weapon. Laughter, especially at his own expense, became a way to steal power from those who mocked him. But beneath the bravado lay a boy desperate to be seen. One of Tyrion's greatest talents emerged early: the ability to observe. While the adults of Casterly Rock argued about gold mines and feuds, Tyrion sat quietly and listened. He absorbed everything: the subtle barbs of highborn politics, the nature of alliances, the delicate dance of flattery and threat. He learned that words could move armies, Lies could topple kingdoms. Truth, when wielded correctly, could destroy or redeem. But even this gift brought him no warmth. The turning point in Tyrion's youth, the moment that defined the rest of his life, came when he was 13 years old. It was the moment he first tasted love, and the moment Tywin Lannister taught him what love would cost. Her name was Tysha. She was a crofter's daughter, simple and sweet, with a smile that made Tyrion feel like a man rather than a monster. They met on the road when she was being harassed by brigands. At least, that is the version Tyrion believed until much later. Jaime and Tyrion chased the men off, and the pair of them brought Tysha to safety. Tyrion, overwhelmed by the kindness she showed him, fell deeply, foolishly, and beautifully in love. For the first time in his life, someone looked at him without flinching. Someone held him without fear. Someone chose him. They married in secret, in a small sept lit by candles, their vows whispered like a prayer. They spent a fortnight together, living as man and wife, laughing, loving, and pretending that the world beyond their small room did not exist. Those 2 weeks became the happiest days Tyrion would ever know. But happiness was a currency the Lannisters rarely traded in. When Tywin discovered the marriage, he summoned the couple and ordered the truth revealed. But the truth was a blade forged by lies. Jaime confessed, falsely, that Tysha had been a hired prostitute purchased to make Tyrion feel like a man. Whether Jaime lied to protect Tysha or because Tywin ordered him to, Tyrion wouldn't learn until decades later. But in that moment, Tyrion's heart broke in a way that would never fully heal. What followed was one of the most devastating scenes in the entire series. Tywin commanded his guards to gang rape Tysha. Tyrion was forced to watch. When they were finished, Tywin commanded Tyrion to take his turn last, tossing him a gold coin. A Lannister pays his debts. The cruelty of the act carved itself into Tyrion's soul. It taught him that love was a lie, trust was a weapon, and his father was capable of savagery beyond comprehension. The boy Tyrion had been died that day. In his place rose a man who wore cynicism, like armor. Years passed, and Tyrion became an expert at navigating his pain. He filled the emptiness with wine, brothels, and humor. His wit sharpened into something people began to fear. His intelligence became invaluable, but never respected. His relationship with Tywin remained venomous. His relationship with Cersei worsened, rooted in paranoia and mutual contempt. Only Jaime remained a flicker of the connection he longed for, though always at a distance. When King Robert rode to Winterfell, Tyrion accompanied the royal procession. It was there, in the cold northern halls, that he found something unexpected. A friend. Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell, was the first person in years who treated Tyrion with honesty. Their conversations were sharp and candid. Jon did not pity Tyrion. Tyrion did not belittle Jon. They were two outcasts sharing a fire, discussing what it meant to be born wrong in a world obsessed with appearances. It was during this time that Tyrion spoke the line that would define his philosophy. Never forget what you are. The world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you. In Jon, Tyrion found someone who understood him, and that understanding shaped his decision to travel to the Wall. The journey north changed him. The Wall, that colossal monument of ancient ice, humbled him. Castle Black exposed him to the truth of the Night's Watch, a brotherhood fallen, filled with thieves, rapists, and unwanted sons. Tyrion, who recognized broken things more than most, saw potential in Jon Snow and compassion in the men others dismissed. During his stay, Tyrion listened. He advised. He intervened when Jon's pride nearly made him enemies. More importantly, he designed a saddle that would allow young Bran Stark to ride again. Tyrion's first unmistakable act of goodwill in the story. These early moments show something crucial about Tyrion Lannister. He is not defined solely by bitterness. He is capable of empathy, of kindness, of selfless action, even when the world has shown him little of the same. But leaving the wall would mark the end of the calm before the storm. As Tyrion rode south along the King's Road, he carried no idea of what awaited him. He did not know that his name had already been whispered in accusation. He did not know that a Valyrian steel dagger would become a symbol of treachery attached to him. And he most certainly did not know that Catelyn Stark, driven by fear for her son, was already preparing the snare that would drag Tyrion into the blood-soaked heart of the War of the Five Kings. Tyrion Lannister's journey south from the Wall began with nothing more troubling than a hangover and a half-frozen horse. He intended to return to Winterfell briefly and then ride onward to King's Landing, content with the thought that he had done a small kindness for Bran Stark and offered Jon Snow whatever truths a bastard needed to hear. What he did not know, as he rode under grey skies and melting snow, was that the world had already shifted beneath his feet. A Valyrian steel dagger, a whispered accusation, a lie crafted by Peter Baelish. These were the seeds that would spiral into war, and Tyrion walked straight into the harvest without understanding the game being played around him. His first stop on the return south was the Winterfell Inn. There, he met Theon Greyjoy and the Stark household guards, who remained behind after the royal visit. Tyrion, pleased with himself for designing Bran's saddle, felt a flicker of pride when he saw the boy riding again with Robb. But the warmth of that moment was short-lived. Robb's reception grew colder the longer Tyrion lingered. Suspicion hung in the air. Suspicion Tyrion could not place. He noticed the tension, but did not understand it. Later, at the Crossroads Inn along the Trident, he found the answer in the most unexpected way. Tyrion was settling in for a meal and a cup of wine when he spotted Catelyn Stark, a woman who, by all rights, should have been in Winterfell. She stood suddenly, calling the attention of every knight and sworn sword in the room. With calm precision, she named their houses and called upon the centuries-old bonds of the North and Riverlands. Catelyn accused Tyrion of attempted murder. The room tightened like a noose. Swords drew, shields lifted. Men who had never met him reached for him with righteous fury. Tyrion protested, demanded explanation, declared innocence. But Catelyn was immovable. She had a mother's certainty, and certainty is often stronger than truth. The dagger used to attempt Bran's murder, she claimed, belonged to him. A dagger Tyrion had never seen. A dagger Littlefinger had deliberately claimed was his. The trap snapped shut. Tyrion Lannister, son of the richest man in the realm, heir to a house not known for forgiveness, was taken under guard, bound, and forced onto the treacherous high road toward the Vale. From the moment they left the inn, Tyrion understood the danger. The high road was infamous. Narrow paths clinging to mountainsides, shadowed valleys haunted by wild clans, and cliffs that swallowed entire convoys. But danger did not frighten him as much as the injustice. Tyrion was accustomed to mockery, accustomed to cruelty, accustomed to being underestimated. But this was different. He was being punished for a crime he had not committed, and there was a chance he might die for it. Catelyn Stark's party marched hard, and Tyrion was dragged along, forced to march, climb, and cling to slippery footholds. At night, he lay bound to trees, shivering against the wind. His captors were not cruel, but they were determined, and their determination made them careless. They believed they were bringing a villain to justice. Tyrion believed they were bringing themselves to their deaths. The mountain clans struck first. As the convoy wound around a narrow ridge, shadows detached themselves from the rocks. Shagga, son of Dolph, led the charge. Fierce, massive, wielding an axe carved from jagged iron. The clansmen howled as they descended upon the travellers, hacking through shields and tearing men from their horses. Chaos erupted. Men screamed. Steel clashed. The high road became a killing ground. In the madness, Tyrion fought. It was not pretty. It was not graceful. But Tyrion survived by instinct, using every scrap of advantage he could find. When the ambush was over, corpses littered the mountainside, and both Catelyn's party and the mountain clans walked away bloodied. Tyrion offered gratitude when Catelyn loosened his bonds, but even then, her eyes remained cold. The high road continued to test them. Each night brought new terrors. Wolves, more clansmen, treacherous slopes, the bitter cold. Tyrion, exhausted and angry, began to argue with Catelyn, facing her accusations with relentless logic. He demanded to know why she believed Littlefinger. He questioned the flimsy chain of evidence. Catelyn wavered, but pride and fear held her steady. She was a mother protecting her child. Sometimes that was all the justification the human heart required. When the gates of the moon finally appeared, it felt like salvation. Harsh white stone gleamed beneath the sun, a site of safety for Catelyn, and perhaps a cage for Tyrion. They rested briefly, then began the climb up the mountain. Unlike Catelyn, Tyrion had never seen the Vale's famed fortress. The Eyrie. Suspended atop a knife-edge peak, it rose into the clouds, cold and unreachable. A castle for gods, not men. Tyrion was marched into the solar of Lysa Arryn, who had fallen even deeper into paranoia and instability since her husband Jon Arryn's death. She greeted Tyrion with shrill accusation, holding young Robert Arryn in her arms as if the child were a king. Lysa insisted Tyrion poisoned her husband. Tyrion realized instantly she was mad. His attempts at reason collapsed under Lysa's zealotry. She ordered him thrown into the sky cell. The sky cells of the Eyrie were not dungeons of bars and chains. They were open-air chambers with sloped floors that tilted subtly toward a bottomless drop. The wind howled day and night. The stars seemed close enough to touch. One misstep, one moment of sleepwalking, and a man would simply fall. Tyrion, who despised heights, was left with nothing but terror for company. He begged, bargained, threatened, even bribed the jailer Maud, who delighted in torment. Tyrion's mind, sharp as ever, adapted to the rhythm of suffering. He realized that to escape, he had to choose a path that played to his strengths, not the strength of arms, but the strength of law. When the moment came that he was brought once more before Lysa Arryn, Tyrion demanded a trial. Not in the sky cells, not under Maud's cruelty, a proper trial. Lysa agreed, and then announced that the trial would be by combat. Tyrion could not fight. His body was too frail, his limbs too short, his training non-existent, but the law allowed him a champion. Lysa expected her husband's knights to refuse him. She expected Tyrion to die. Bronn stepped forward. The sellsword had been travelling with Catelyn's party, observing, calculating, and growing amused by Tyrion's wit. Tyrion promised him wealth. Bronn promised him victory. It was a transaction as old as Westeros. The trial took place in the Ares' High Hall. a vast chamber of white stone lit by shafts of cold sunlight. Ser Vardis Aegon, veteran Knight of the Vale, fought honourably, wearing heavy armour and wielding a steel sword. Bronn, by comparison, fought with the ruthlessness of a man who enjoyed survival more than reputation. He leapt aside, retreated, let Ser Vardis tire, and struck when the knight faltered. The fight ended brutally, with Vardis bleeding out on the stone floor. Lysa shrieked. Bronn stood victorious. By the laws of the realm, Tyrion was innocent. Forced to release him, Lysa sent him down the mountain with Bronn at his side. For the first time since his capture, Tyrion felt control slip back into his grasp, but what awaited him on the road was far from simple freedom. The mountain clans reappeared, this time not as enemies, but as potential allies. Tyrion, recognizing their hunger for plunder and their disdain for the Vale's lords, treated with them as equals. He promised them weapons, gold, and glory if they would escort him safely to his father's camp. The clansmen, impressed by his courage and amused by his audacity, agreed, and so Tyrion Lannister arrived at Tywin's war camp with an army of hill tribes roaring behind him. Tywin's reaction was immediate and cold. He demanded to know why Tyrion had been taken. Tyrion explained the accusation about the dagger. Tywin's anger focused not on Tyrion but on the insult, that a Lannister could be seized without consequence. To Tywin, everything was a matter of power. The slight would not be forgiven. In the days that followed, Tyrion found himself reluctantly drawn into the Lannister war effort. He met the commanders, studied their maps, and listened to Tywin speak with calculated logic about the coming conflict. Tywin intended to crush the Starks swiftly. Tyrion pointed out where his father underestimated their tactics. Tywin dismissed him, but Tyrion saw the battlefield clearly. He saw Robb Stark's potential. He saw the weaknesses in the Lannister lines. He saw the arrogance of the West threatening to turn victory into disaster. War began in earnest. At the Green Fork, Tywin prepared to face the Stark forces. Tyrion was ordered to fight with the hill tribes, positioned on the least important flank. He fought, swinging an ill-fitting axe, surviving by luck, instinct, and the sheer ferocity of Shagga and the other clan chiefs. But even in battle, Tyrion saw the greater truth. Robb Stark had outmaneuvered Tywin. The Stark host was elsewhere marching toward Jaime. What Tyrion witnessed next, after the fighting died down, was the beginning of the unraveling of the Seven Kingdoms, and his role in it was only just beginning. Tyrion entered King's Landing long before dawn, the city smothered under a haze of smoke, sewage, and restless tension. Even from the saddle he could feel it. A kingdom rotting beneath the weight of a boy king and a court that whispered treason behind every silken curtain. When he reached the Red Keep, the gold cloaks barely spared him a glance. No herald, no fanfare. Just another Lannister returning to a capital that no longer knew stability. But Tyrion had not come to be ignored. He had come with a letter declaring him Hand of the King. Tywin had not intended it as a compliment. It was punishment, duty, and insult in a single stroke. Tywin did not trust Cersei with the throne's day-to-day survival, did not trust Joffrey with anything, and needed someone whose failure could be blamed on incompetence rather than on the Lannister name. Tyrion was perfect, brilliant enough to succeed, low enough in station, in Tywin's eyes, that any backlash could be contained. Tyrion walked into the small council chamber with Bronn behind him, armor still dusted with the dirt of the riverlands. Varys, Littlefinger, Pycelle, and a handful of lesser functionaries looked up in surprise as Tyrion flashed the royal seal. He watched their reactions carefully. The widening of Varys's eyes, the stiffening of Pycelle's shoulders, the calculating smirk that tugged at Littlefinger's lips. Cersei was not present. He found her in the Tower of the Hand, their father's old domain, standing before a table scattered with military reports and letters. She greeted him with open disdain. Her authority had been eroded by Joffrey's cruelty and her own inept decisions, and she knew it. The arrival of Tyrion, with Tywin's explicit command to rein in the king, struck her pride like a hammer. Their argument ignited instantly. Cersei blamed Tyrion for Ned Stark's death. Tyrion blamed Cersei for starting a war by seizing Ned in the first place. She insisted Joffrey was righteous. He insisted Joffrey was a child ruling a realm he did not understand. Their words burned the air between them. This confrontation would set the tone of their relationship for the entire saga. Hostility balanced on a blade sharpened by shared blood. Tyrion was now hand, and being hand meant he inherited every bad decision Cersei had made in the months prior. King's Landing was starving. The treasury was empty. The armies were unprepared. The riverlands burned. Stannis Baratheon gathered ships at Dragonstone. Renly Baratheon amassed a massive army in the Reach. The Lannisters were at war on 3 fronts. Tyrion understood instantly that the true danger was not some foreign invasion or mythical prophecy. It was incompetence. His first battle was against information. He walked the city streets, not with gold-cloaked guards, but with Bronn, listening to the people speak freely. He went to taverns, brothels, markets, anywhere his father had never bothered to look. He saw hungry children, dying beggars, and ordinary folk terrified of a king who ordered beatings and beheadings for amusement. The city did not need a hero. It needed a manager. Tyrion began by pruning the small council. Pycelle was the easiest target. Tyrion had long suspected him of serving House Lannister selectively, rather than serving the realm. Pycelle had sent ravens to Casterly Rock, without informing the Hand. Worse, he had played a role in Jon Arryn's death. Tyrion ordered Bronn to arrest him, cutting off half his beard in the process. Littlefinger and Varys were more delicate matters. Tyrion employed a game of 3 lies, telling each man a different marriage plan for Princess Myrcella, and waiting to see which rumour reached Cersei first. The betrayal came quickly. Pycelle had spilled the secret. The other 2 remained useful. Then Tyrion turned his attention to the king. Joffrey's cruelty had become explosive. He had ordered beatings of Sansa, threatened executions, and treated the throne like a toy. Tyrion confronted him publicly, a dangerous move, telling him plainly that king or not, he would not abuse a hostage. Tyrion's words struck the boy like cold iron, and though Joffrey did not obey entirely, he feared Tyrion in a way he did not fear Cersei. With the court partially stabilized, Tyrion shifted to external threats. Stannis Baratheon, rightful heir by law, sent a letter throughout the 7 kingdoms proclaiming Joffrey a bastard born of incest. Tyrion knew this letter could ignite rebellion. He moved swiftly to counter Stannis by reinforcing the city walls, building alliances with the Kettleblacks and key mercenary groups, and preparing a defense for the coming siege. He also recognized the value of wildfire. The Alchemist Guild, long ignored, had spent years stockpiling the volatile substance. Under Tyrion's direction, they increased production. Barrels of wildfire glowed with sickly green light in underground vaults. The substance was dangerous, unpredictable, capable of burning even on water. But Tyrion understood its potential as a weapon of last resort. Meanwhile, Tyrion's relationship with Shae deepened. Shae became both his comfort and his weakness. He brought her into King's Landing despite every instinct warning him not to. He hid her in a house near the Red Keep, under the pretense of being a maid to Lolly Stokeworth. Tyrion felt for her something dangerously close to love, and because he could not have the woman without shame, he gave her coin and fine clothes. His heart, still bearing the scar of Tysha, clung to Shae anyway. But the more Tyrion succeeded politically, the more isolated he became personally. Cersei plotted constantly. She kidnapped Tyrion's lover, or so she thought, and threatened to harm her unless Tyrion behaved. Cersei did not know she held Ros, not Shae. Tyrion, masking terror beneath a veneer of cold fury, played along. This moment marked a shift. Cersei realized Tyrion was more dangerous than she had ever understood. Littlefinger continued weaving chaos. Varys continued playing his long game. Joffrey continued sowing fear. And the people of King's Landing tightened their belts as famine gnawed at them. Tyrion's measures helped, but the city still teetered. Then came the riot. Tyrion, Joffrey, and the royal party travelled through the crowded streets after seeing Princess Myrcella off to Dorne. A brilliant political move Tyrion orchestrated to win the Martells' loyalty. But the starving masses, pushed too far by hunger and royal indifference, erupted into violence. They hurled dung, stones, and insults at Joffrey. One man threw a clod that struck the king's cheek. Joffrey ordered the crowd slaughtered. The city exploded. Riots tore through Flea Bottom. Septons were dragged into the streets. Lannister guards were ripped apart. In the chaos, King Joffrey nearly died. Sansa Stark was almost raped by the mob before Sandor Clegane found her and hacked a path back to the castle. Tyrion screamed at Joffrey afterward, calling him a fool who would cost them the kingdom. The confrontation left the boy king trembling and red with humiliation. Tyrion's authority strengthened, but it also sowed seeds of deep poisonous resentment. War arrived soon after. Stannis Baratheon sailed for King's Landing with a massive fleet and a veteran army. Tyrion knew the city could not hold without strategy, deception, and fire. He ordered the construction of a massive chain to stretch across Blackwater Bay, hidden beneath the waves until the right moment. He deployed wildfire barrels as floating bombs. He commanded the walls, the towers, the streets. Tyrion Lannister, mocked, dismissed, underestimated his entire life, became the commander of a city preparing for annihilation. On the eve of battle, the city trembled. Refugees flooded the gates. A red comet burned in the sky. Joffrey strutted in golden armor, playing king while Tyrion made decisions that would determine the fate of hundreds of thousands. When Stannis' fleet entered the bay, Tyrion gave the order. The wildfire detonated. A sickly green inferno consumed ships, men, water, everything. The explosion lit the sky so brightly that soldiers on the walls fell back in terror. Stannis' vanguard was annihilated in seconds. The bay became a floating cemetery of burning wood and screaming men. But Stannis did not retreat. His remaining forces landed and stormed the gates. The Hound fled the battlefield, traumatized by fire. Joffrey abandoned the front lines to comfort his mother. The gold cloaks panicked. The men wavered. It was Tyrion who stepped forward. A dwarf in mismatched armor, wielding an axe, shouting for the men to follow him. He led the charge through the mud gate, surprising Stannis' forces. His speech, half fury, half desperation, rallied the defenders. For a moment, it seemed the city might hold. Then Sir Mandon Moore, a Kingsguard knight, struck Tyrion down with a sword slash meant to kill him. The attempt was no accident. Someone had ordered Tyrion's death. Podrick Payne, the most unlikely hero in the battle, pushed Mandan into the Blackwater, saving Tyrion's life. As Tyrion lay bleeding in the mud, his vision fading, he did not know that Tywin Lannister, along with the Tyrells, had arrived to smash Stannis' forces and save the city. Tyrion saved King's Landing, and the credit went to Tywin. When Tyrion woke days later, his face was scarred, his command stripped, his title taken. Shae wept at his bedside. Cersei smiled. Joffrey celebrated. The city hailed Tywin as the saviour. Tyrion, left in a dim room with half his nose gone and his power crumbling, realized what it meant to win a war in a family that despised him. He had saved the kingdom, and the kingdom wanted him forgotten. Tyrion recovered slowly, and recovery was hardly the right word for it. He woke in a dim chamber with bandages wrapped around his head, his vision blurred, his throat dry. His hand drifted to his face, and he felt the absence immediately. The jagged place where Sir Mandan Moore's blade had sheared away half his nose. The man who had commanded the defences of King's Landing no longer recognized himself in polished metal or still water. Shae tended him as best she could, whispering reassurances, afraid to believe. Her hands were gentle, her voice soft, but Tyrion felt the growing distance between them. War had changed him. Power had changed him. His family's machinations had scarred him in ways no blade could. Shae had once been a refuge. Now she was a reminder of everything he could not keep. When Tyrion finally left the sickbed, he found the Red Keep transformed. Tywin Lannister ruled the city with iron certainty. The Tyrells flooded the court with charm, wealth, and soldiers. New banners hung beside old. The songs sang of Tywin's victory, not Tyrion's. And in the throne room, Joffrey sat preening under a crown he had no right to wear. Tyrion approached the small council chamber expecting gratitude, or at least acknowledgement. Instead, Pycelle glared, Littlefinger smirked, and Cersei looked triumphant. Tywin sat at the head of the table, silent and severe. When Tyrion asked for recognition or restoration of authority, Tywin replied only that a man who nearly died should be grateful to be alive. Tyrion understood the truth instantly. His father would allow him no glory. His sister would grant him no peace. His king would afford him no respect. And so Tyrion Lannister, the true defender of the city, returned to politics with nothing but bitterness. His first humiliation came soon after, the dismissal from the Tower of the Hand. Tywin reclaimed the quarters Tyrion had used while ruling. Tyrion, bruised and limping, was forced to move back to the cramped chambers he had abandoned before the siege. Servants smirked as they carried his possessions down the stairs. Tyrion said nothing. He refused to let them see the wound inside him reopen. As if to mock him further, Tywin ordered a lavish feast to celebrate the victory. A feast to which Tyrion was merely invited, not honoured. He watched from a lesser seat as nobles toasted his father, while his own actions went unspoken. He drank heavily, the bitterness sinking deeper. Yet Tyrion's mind was too sharp to sink completely. He saw the political landscape clearly. The Tyrells had come to King's Landing not only as saviours, but as conquerors by marriage. Margaery would wed Joffrey, cementing an alliance that shifted the balance of power. Cersei resented them. Tywin needed them. Joffrey adored the idea of a new bride. Tyrion saw opportunity in every discomfort, but opportunity was limited for a man routinely shoved aside. Then came the question of Sansa Stark, with Robb Stark proclaimed king in the north. Sansa, still a hostage in King's Landing, became a key piece on the board. Tywin shrewd as ever, recognized that the Starks' future could be manipulated through Sansa's marriage. At first, he intended to marry her to someone loyal to the West, but plans shifted. Tywin announced not long after that Tyrion would wed Sansa. The news hit Tyrion like a spear to the ribs. He was to marry a girl half his age, a girl who despised his house, a girl who had lost her father to Lannister blades. Tyrion felt the cruelty of it, not toward him, but toward her. He had no desire to hurt Sansa or claim her body, but Tywin decreed, and when Tywin commanded, the world bent. Sansa wept when she heard the news. Tyrion saw her face at the wedding, pale, distant, terrified. He wanted to offer comfort, but comfort was impossible between them. Their marriage was a cage for both. In the Sept, Tyrion stood before the altar as Sansa knelt to fasten the cloak of House Lannister around her shoulders. His short arms could not reach her. Joffrey laughed cruelly. The court joined in. That night, Tyrion led Sansa to their chamber. Lamps glowed softly. A bed waited, but Tyrion poured himself a cup of wine and told her plainly, "I will not touch you until you want me to." She thanked him, voice barely audible. They went to bed fully clothed. Days became weeks. Their marriage grew into a quiet, painful companionship. Tyrion tried gently to treat her kindly. She responded with the dutiful politeness of a girl trying to survive. Shay's jealousy ignited. Tyrion's attempts to balance honor, desire, and shame began to unravel. His entire life felt like a room of moving walls tightening around him. Then came the invitation to the grand feast, the wedding of King Joffrey Baratheon and Margaery Tyrell, the Purple Wedding. King's Landing erupted in celebration. Banners flew. Musicians arrived from across the realm. The Red Keep glittered with Lannister gold and Tyrell emerald. Tyrion stood beside Sansa as they walked into the feast hall, dwarfed by the size of the event and the smugness of its king. The tables groaned under the weight of food. Wine poured endlessly. Performers strutted across the floor, and at the center of it all sat Joffrey, basking in attention, towering above the hall in a crown tipped with sharp rubies. Tyrion's unease grew with every moment. Joffrey began by humiliating him, first with a mock joust featuring dwarves reenacting the War of the Five Kings, then by forcing Tyrion to serve as his cupbearer. Every eye watched as Joffrey commanded Tyrion to pour wine, kneel, fetch goblets, scramble across the hall. Sansa tugged gently at Tyrion's sleeve, urging him silently not to provoke the boy. Tyrion swallowed insult after insult. Joffrey lifted the great wedding chalice, a massive golden cup, and drank. Moments later, the coughing began. At first, the guests thought the king was choking on food. Then they saw his face turn purple. His eyes bulged. His hands clawed at his throat. The hall erupted into chaos. Margaery screamed. Cersei lunged toward her son. Tywin rose at once, demanding order. Joffrey toppled from his seat, body convulsing. And when he fell, the great chalice rolled across the floor, right to Tyrion's feet. Cersei looked up, her face twisted into a mask of hatred and clarity twisted by grief. She called out Tyrion's name, not in fear, but in accusation. "He did this," she shrieked. "He murdered the king." Guards seized Tyrion. Sansa vanished in the confusion. The feast hall collapsed into panic. Tyrion felt rough hands drag him from the room, felt the stares of hundreds, some horrified, some eager, all convinced of his guilt. He was thrown into the black cells beneath the Red Keep. The darkness felt familiar. Tyrion sat against the cold stone, stewing in fury and fear. Guards brought him little food, no comfort, no explanation. Days passed. He was allowed water and the knowledge that both Cersei and Tywin had turned the full power of the crown against him. When his trial began, the entire court filled the throne room, hungry for spectacle. Witness after witness stepped forward to condemn him. Every word twisted, every action misrepresented. Pycelle spoke of poisons. Meryn Trant recalled imagined insults. Cersei accused him with venom. Sansa's disappearance was used as further proof. Then came Shae. Her betrayal landed like a blow to the chest. She stepped forward, and with teary eyes and practiced innocence, claimed Tyrion had plotted the murder, beaten her, threatened her. She told stories that were lies wrapped around half-truths. Tyrion stared at her, his heart breaking, realizing how little he truly understood about the woman he had tried desperately to keep. He felt the room watching him with disgust. They saw a monster. They saw a killer. They saw exactly what they had always believed him to be. Tyrion erupted. In a moment of pure rage and clarity, he delivered a speech that echoed through the hall, condemning the city, the court, the king, and everyone who had mocked and tormented him. He confessed to one crime only. "I have been on trial for being a dwarf my entire life." His voice carried venom and brilliance. When Tywin moved to pronounce judgment, Tyrion shouted, "I demand a trial by combat." Gasps filled the hall. Cersei selected Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, as her champion. Jaime could not fight, having lost his sword hand. Bronn refused, his pragmatism finally outweighing loyalty. Tyrion stood alone, until Oberyn Martell stepped forward. The Red Viper smiled, seeing in Tyrion's trial a chance to strike at Tywin, at the Lannisters, and most of all, at Gregor Clegane, the man who had raped and murdered his sister Elia. The trial by combat was set. Tyrion's freedom, life, and future hung entirely on the spear of a man who delighted in dancing with death. Nothing else remained in his control. The trial by combat promised spectacle, but beneath the theatrics lay a tension that gripped King's Landing like a vice. Rumors spread through the city of the duel to come. Whispers of vengeance, whispers of blood. Tyrion listened from the darkness of his cell, the stale air thick with despair, hope, and fear in equal measure. Oberyn Martell had pledged himself as Tyrion's champion, and that single act had shifted the entire balance of the trial. The Dornish prince was no common sellsword, no naive volunteer. He was the Red Viper, poison, precision, and passion balanced on a single spear point. But more importantly, he had come to King's Landing seeking justice for the murder of his sister Elia and her children. Justice that had been denied to him for nearly 20 years. Tyrion understood the gravity of Oberyn's involvement. The prince did not fight for Tyrion. He fought for his own ghosts. If he survived, Tyrion would live. If he failed, Tyrion would die. Tyrion's life was a small stone caught in the river of Oberyn's vengeance. When Oberyn visited Tyrion in his cell, the conversation flickered between humour and truth. The Dornish prince drank wine, lounged against the stone wall, and assured Tyrion that he would win. His confidence was unsettling. Not false bravado, but a calm certainty rooted in decades of combat. Tyrion tried to believe him. In the deepest recesses of his mind, he clung to the hope that Oberyn's desire to punish the Mountain would overpower Gregor Clegane's brute strength. Yet memories of Sir Mandon Moore's betrayal and the blade that had carved his face haunted him. Kingsguard knights had tried to kill him. Cersei wanted him dead. Tywin had abandoned him. Shae had betrayed him. Every force that once protected Tyrion had turned against him. Oberyn was the only man standing between him and execution. The morning of the trial was blistering with heat. The sun beat down on the capital as though the gods themselves wished to witness the spectacle. The duel would take place in the Red Keep's outer yard, where crowds gathered along balconies and walkways. The nobles filled the seats first. They wore silks and jewels, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Even Pycelle seemed alert for once. Tyrion was brought forth and placed beside Tywin, Cersei, Mace Tyrell, and other high lords. His shackles were removed, but the weight of them lingered on his wrists. His father did not look at him. His sister's eyes glowed with triumph. Tyrion felt the world narrow around him as he gazed at the field below. Gregor Clegane entered first. A giant in armor, the mountain towered above everyone, a monstrous figure of steel and hate. His greatsword looked like a toy in his hands. His helmet was black, his visor a skull-like slit. He radiated death. Oberyn arrived moments later, dressed in light armor the color of sunlit copper. He carried a long spear tipped with a shining, narrow blade. The prince walked casually, every step graceful. His confidence was magnetic. When the herald signaled the beginning, Oberyn did not rush. He circled the mountain, spear spinning delicately in his hands. His voice rang out across the yard. "You raped her, you murdered her, you killed her children." The words were a song of accusation, a rhythm he repeated as he darted in and out of reach, slashing at Gregor's armor, cutting through gaps with flawless precision. The spectators watched with bated breath. The mountain swung his blade in wide arcs that could have cut men in half, but Oberyn avoided each with a dancer's grace. Tyrion's heart pounded. Hope, dangerous, intoxicating, flickered within him. Oberyn's spear struck again and again. Blood began to seep from the mountain's armor. The giant faltered, dropping to one knee. The crowd gasped. Tyrion gripped the railing so tightly his hands shook. Victory seemed inevitable. But Oberyn was not satisfied with victory. He wanted confession. He wanted Gregor Clegane to say her name, to admit to the murder of Elia Martell and her children. Oberyn stepped too close, demanding answers, shouting accusations. Gregor surged upward with one final burst of monstrous strength. The mountain tackled Oberyn, knocking him to the ground. In one horrifying moment he smashed the prince's teeth from his mouth, then wrapped massive hands around his skull. Tyrion stared in frozen terror as Gregor Clegane confessed, screaming Elia's name, describing the horrors he committed, and then crushed Oberyn's head like a ripe melon. The scream that followed came from every throat in the yard. Silence descended like a shroud. Tyrion's world collapsed in an instant. The last flicker of hope died as Oberyn's body twitched lifelessly. Gregor's blood spattered the ground, yet he remained upright. A brute victory, incarnate. Cersei rose to her feet, triumphant. Tywin stood slowly, face unreadable. The herald declared the verdict. Tyrion Lannister was guilty. His sentence, death. Guards seized him once more, dragging him back to the black cells. The walk felt longer, heavier, filled with echoes of Oberyn's screams and the crunch of bone. Tyrion did not speak. There were no clever retorts left inside him. His humor had always been armor, and now even that had cracked. Back in the cell, Tyrion waited for execution. Varys visited briefly, offering condolences that felt too vague, too rehearsed. Jaime came later, after days had passed. When he slipped into the cell, Tyrion could see guilt in his brother's eyes. Guilt for leaving him helpless. Guilt for trusting the Kingsguard. Guilt for letting the trial play out as it had. Jaime carried a truth that shattered the last illusion Tyrion held. The truth about Tysha. For decades, Tyrion believed Tysha had been a prostitute, purchased by Jaime to give him the illusion of love. But Jaime told him the truth in the darkness of that cell. Tysha had not been hired. She had loved Tyrion. She had wanted him. Their marriage had been real, and Tywin had destroyed it deliberately. The revelation broke something inside Tyrion that had survived war, humiliation, and betrayal. Jaime begged forgiveness, but Tyrion stared at him with a hatred he had never known before. The lies of his childhood, the cruelty of his father, the years of pain, they all coalesced into a single burning emotion. Jaime unlocked the cell door. Varys guided Tyrion through the tunnels. Freedom lay inches away. But Tyrion could not leave the Red Keep without confronting the man who had shaped his torment. He climbed the Tower of the Hand, slipping into rooms he had once walked as a ruler. The hallways were dark, silent. He reached the door of the master chamber and pushed it open quietly. Shae was inside, not dead, not imprisoned, not mourning him, but in Tywin's bed. She lay upon silken sheets, wearing one of Tywin's golden chains, her eyes wide with fear as she awakened. The betrayal bit deeper than any blade. Tyrion lunged and Shae reached for a dagger. They struggled, and when it ended, Shae lay lifeless, strangled by the very chain she had worn. Tyrion stood trembling. Then he turned toward the next room. Tywin was in the privy, sitting upon the latrine, surprised but not afraid. Tyrion held the crossbow. Tywin attempted to talk, to reason, to command. He lied. He dismissed Tysha as if she were nothing. His arrogance remained untouched by fear or consequence. Tyrion warned him, "Say her name again, and die." Tywin Lannister said her name. Tyrion fired. The bolt struck him in the groin. Tywin gasped, shocked. He tried to rise, but Tyrion fired again. The second bolt drove him back into the seat. The man who ruled Westeros through fear died ignobly in a latrine. Tyrion fled through the secret passageways, tears and fury mingling with sweat. Varys met him at the docks as planned, saying little. The spider helped him onto a crate-bound ship in the darkness. The smell of salt and tar filled the air. Lanterns flickered. When Tyrion asked where they were going, Varys replied, "Across the narrow sea." Tyrion Lannister, convicted murderer of a king, slayer of his father, abandoned by his family, sailed into exile. And the man who left Westeros that night was not the same man who arrived at King's Landing months before. The ship that carried Tyrion away from Westeros groaned under the weight of crates, sailors, and shadows cast by moonlight. The narrow sea stretched endlessly before him, a vast divide between the man he once was and the man he would become. He had left behind corpses, Shae's still hands, Tywin's lifeless stare, and he carried with him the weight of crimes both real and imagined. The salt wind filled his lungs, but no amount of clean sea air could purge the bitterness from his soul. Tyrion travelled hidden in a crate for most of the voyage, concealed by Varys' network. The spider himself vanished into the night after guiding him aboard. Tyrion lay alone in the darkness, with only wine and memory for company. The rocking of the ship became a cradle and a coffin at once. His father's death played over and over in his mind. The look of shock, of incredulity, of a man who had never believed he could be killed by something so small. The thought did not comfort him. It hollowed him. When the ship reached Pentos, Tyrion emerged gaunt and weary. Illyrio Mopatis, a merchant prince of considerable size, influence and cunning, welcomed him with open arms. Illyrio's mansion was filled with silks, perfumes, and luxuries that mocked Tyrion's state of mind. The man fed him richly, poured him sweet wine, and pressed him for stories. But Tyrion saw through the hospitality. Illyrio was maneuvering him like a piece on a board. A Lannister in exile was valuable, and one who had murdered Tywin might be invaluable. Tyrion, who once took pride in wit, drank more than he spoke. His humour grew darker. His hands shook. He wandered Illyrio's estate at night, staring into fountains and pools as if waiting for his reflection to become someone else. It never did. Illyrio eventually revealed his plan. There was a queen across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen, gathering strength, conquering cities, and preparing to reclaim the Iron Throne. Illyrio believed she needed guidance. Daenerys had dragons, armies, and advisors, but she lacked political experience. A mind like Tyrion's could make her unstoppable. Tyrion laughed, a bitter, broken sound. He had no desire to become anyone's advisor, much less a queen's. But the truth was undeniable. He had nowhere else to go. Westeros would kill him. Essos had no need for him. Wine alone could not sustain him. And so, he travelled across the free cities, escorted by a merchant caravan. The journey was a haze of taverns, brothels, and cups of cheap wine. Tyrion drank constantly, trying to drown guilt and memory, but memory swam. Shay's last breath haunted him. Tywin's blood stained his dreams. Even Jaime's confession echoed. She loved you. Tyrion could not escape. His caravan eventually connected him to Griff and young Griff, exiles with their own agenda. They sailed downriver toward Volantis, and Tyrion spent much of the time playing Cyvasse, a game of strategy he found ironically comforting. With each match, he saw patterns in the pieces: knights, spearmen, elephants. Pieces moved by choice or by compulsion. He wondered endlessly which one he was. As they travelled, Tyrion provoked Griff, amused himself with young Griff's education, and tried to drown his grief in the river's murky banks. But when he learned the truth, young Griff claimed to be Aegon Targaryen, the supposed dead son of Rhaegar. Tyrion's mind sharpened. If the boy was real, he had a claim stronger than Daenerys's. If he was false, he was a weapon waiting to misfire. Tyrion planted the seeds that would grow into rebellion. He advised young Griff, subtly, cleverly, that the surest way to prove himself was to attack Westeros immediately, rather than wait for Daenerys. Tyrion had no loyalty to the Targaryens, but he had begun to rediscover his identity through strategy rather than wine. It was dangerous. It was invigorating. The river journey ended abruptly when their ship came under attack. Tyrion was cast into the water, swallowed by chaos and darkness. When he surfaced, gasping, he found himself drifting alone, clinging to debris. He washed ashore near Soloris and wandered until slavers captured him. Chains replaced wine. Tyrion was sold in a slave market, branded, humiliated, dragged like livestock. The slavers mocked his size and appearance, unaware of the mind they had purchased. Yet even in chains, Tyrion's wit did not falter. He amused the crowds with riddles. He insulted his captors in languages they only half understood. He reshaped his value, transforming himself from a deformed slave to a comic novelty worth keeping alive. Through misfortune or fate, he eventually found himself among Jorah Mormont, disgraced knight, former exile, and relentless seeker of redemption. Jorah, having seen Tyrion's letter in the tavern, recognized him instantly. The knight seized Tyrion and declared his intention to present him to Daenerys Targaryen. Jorah saw in Tyrion a gift that might earn him forgiveness, perhaps even return him to Daenerys' side. Tyrion saw something else, a man driven by love too, desperation. Their journey toward Meereen was fraught with tension. They passed through the ruins of old Valyria, a realm cursed by fire and magic. Tyrion felt the ghost of history in every stone, every whisper of wind. Dragons once ruled here. Civilization once flourished here. And now nothing remained but smoke and shadow. Their boat encountered the Doom's remnants. Stone men infected with grayscale. Jorah fought them bravely, but was touched in the struggle. He said nothing at first. Tyrion, however, noticed the shift in his demeanor, the desperation tightening his jaw. It was only when the truth became undeniable that Tyrion realized the stakes had changed again. Jorah was dying. They continued nonetheless, pressing on toward Meereen, where Daenerys ruled imperfectly but passionately. The city's pyramids rose above the horizon like fractured teeth in the sand. Slaver's Bay smelled of fear, sweat, and liberation struggling to be born. By the time they reached the outskirts of the city, Jorah's strength faltered. Tyrion and Jorah entered Meereen as captives, sold to a slave-fighting troupe that saw novelty in pairing a dwarf with a dying knight for entertainment. They performed in mock battles, drawing crowds who thrilled at the sight of unlikely warriors. Tyrion, against all odds, survived each event, using wit and timing to avoid death. Their fate changed on the day the fighting pits reopened. Daenerys Targaryen presided over the spectacle, flanked by advisors, soldiers, and city officials. Tyrion watched her from below. A young queen with silver hair, eyes like distant storms, and a presence that commanded without effort. When Jorah fought and won in the arena, he approached her, desperate for recognition. Daenerys recoiled, but Tyrion stepped forward. A Lannister bowed to a Targaryen. He introduced himself simply. "My name is Tyrion Lannister." Daenerys studied him, her gaze steady and sharp. Not hatred, curiosity. Tyrion, for the first time in months, remembered who he was. He offered counsel. He offered truth. He offered experience forged in the fires of court and war. Daenerys agreed to hear what he had to say. In the halls of Meereen, Tyrion found a strange sense of belonging. He understood Daenerys' challenges, politics disguised as idealism, cities pretending at freedom, advisors hiding agendas. He drank less. He observed more. He spoke cautiously but truthfully. Daenerys asked him why he killed his father. Tyrion told her. She asked why he fled Westeros. He answered with honesty, sharpened by pain. Slowly, she grew to respect him. Not as a Lannister, not as a Westerosi lord, but as a man capable of seeing the world's hypocrisies clearly. When Daenerys disappeared atop Drogon during the chaos of the fighting pits, Meereen fell into crisis. Tyrion remained behind with Grey Worm, Missandei, and a handful of loyalists. He formed a ruling council, navigating threats from the Sons of the Harpy, the encroaching armies of Yunkai and Astapor, and the fragile alliances within the city. He drank again, out of necessity, he told himself. But his mind remained sharp. His strategies kept the city breathing, if not thriving. When the slaver coalition surrounded Meereen with ships, Tyrion organized negotiations that stalled bloodshed, buying time for a queen who might never return. When Daenerys finally arrived, riding Drogon, flames in her wake, the world shifted once more. The dragons destroyed the Slava fleet. Fire painted the sky. Daenerys reclaimed her city, her army, her momentum, and she looked again to Tyrion, this time not with curiosity, but with trust. She named him Hand of the Queen. In that moment, Tyrion felt a flicker of something he had not known since childhood. Purpose without shame, value without mockery. A role he had earned, not inherited. A position in service to a monarch who wanted him, not one forced upon him by a father who despised him. Yet even as he accepted the pin, Tyrion felt the weight of expectation. Daenerys fought for freedom. He fought for survival. Their paths intertwined, but they were not identical. Tyrion had fled Westeros a broken man. Now he was returning to it as the right hand of a dragon. And though he did not yet know it, the choices he made in Daenerys' name would shape the destiny of kingdoms. Tyrion Lannister wore the hand of the Queen's pin beneath the shadow of Meereen's Great Pyramid, the metal cool and heavy against his chest. The weight was symbolic, the burden immense. Daenerys Targaryen trusted him, not with flattery, not with ceremony, but with the future she intended to claim. She was gathering ships, soldiers and purpose. Tyrion, meanwhile, gathered doubts. His exile had carved him into a new man, but memory still shackled him. The wine cups he tried to avoid pulled him back with desperate gravity. Shadows of Shay, Tywin and King's Landing slithered behind him, no matter how far he travelled. Yet Tyrion forced himself to stand straighter than before. Daenerys needed his counsel, and for the first time in his life, someone of power actually listened. Meereen was no longer his domain once Daenerys returned on Drogon's back. Her dramatic reappearance had shattered the morale of her enemies. Flames devoured ships. The air shook with the roar of dragons, and slavers who once postured with arrogance now bowed low or fled. Tyrion watched the destruction, awe mingling with unease. He understood fire as a weapon. He had used wildfire himself. But Daenerys wielded something older, more absolute. When she summoned him after the victory, her expression was measured. She asked him plainly if he believed her actions were right. Tyrion, cautious and still nursing the sting of recent failures, answered honestly. Fire could win battles, but it could also hollow out kingdoms. Daenerys listened, truly listened, and when she named him Hand of the Queen, it was with a solemnity that made Tyrion's breath catch. He bowed, and for once, it felt like homage instead of humiliation. Preparations for the voyage to Westeros began immediately. Tyrion oversaw supply chains, negotiated alliances, and strategized naval formations. Meereen became a departure point, a temporary chapter. The unsullied boarded ships with practiced discipline. The Dothraki loaded horses onto transports with roars of excitement. The 3 dragons wheeled above, impatient shadows cast on the waves. Daenerys stood at the prow of her flagship. Tyrion stood beside her. For a heartbeat, he allowed himself to imagine redemption. Not the redemption of his family name, but the redemption of his own soul. A queen who valued freedom, guided by a mind sharpened through suffering. Perhaps, Tyrion wondered, he could help her avoid the mistakes of kings before her. The crossing was long, but without disaster. During the voyage, Tyrion spent hours with Missandei and Grey Worm, learning the rhythms of their speech and the depth of their loyalty. They trusted Daenerys with a faith Tyrion did not yet understand. Faith rooted not in lineage, but in liberation. Yet Tyrion also saw that Daenerys' authority was absolute. Her mercy was selective. Her temper was quick. A queen with dragons was not easily guided. When they landed on the shores of Dragonstone, Tyrion walked the ancient halls with a sense of eerie nostalgia. His family's enemies had once ruled here. Now he returned as the hand of their last descendant. The stone walls echoed with the ghosts of Aegon's conquest. Tyrion traced carvings of dragons with trembling fingers, marveling at the long arc of history that had brought him back to Westeros. Daenerys convened her council almost immediately. Tyrion urged restraint, to win the throne through strategy, not fear. He advised against attacking King's Landing directly, fearing that thousands of innocents would burn in the crossfire. Daenerys agreed reluctantly, promising not to be Queen of the Ashes. It was a small victory. Tyrion felt pride, but pride was always followed by dread. Every plan he devised unraveled. Yara Greyjoy's fleet was ambushed by Euron Greyjoy, flames and iron raining across the sea. The Dornish alliance collapsed overnight when Ellaria Sand was captured. The Tyrells were destroyed in a flawless strike by Jaime Lannister and Randyll Tarly. One by one, Daenerys' allies fell, her careful strategy crumbling as rapidly as Tyrion's confidence. For the first time, Daenerys questioned him, not with anger, but with suspicion. "All my enemies are defeated," she said quietly, "except yours." Tyrion heard the accusation beneath the words. Was he protecting his brother? He denied it, but doubt had taken root. Daenerys turned to fire. Her dragons burned the Lannister Tarly army in a single terrifying assault. Tyrion watched from a distant ridge, heart pounding as Drogon's flames devoured soldiers he had once commanded. The screams were unmistakable. The fear was palpable. And when Daenerys demanded the defeated bend the knee, Randyll Tarly refused. His son Dickon refused with him. Daenerys burned them both alive. Tyrion's horror deepened. Daenerys defended her judgment as firm justice, the justice of conquerors. Tyrion warned her that ruling through fire would turn the realm against her. Daenerys answered that she would give the people a choice: bend the knee or suffer the fate of traitors. The divide between their values widened. When Jon Snow arrived on Dragonstone, Tyrion's world shook again. Jon, the bastard of Winterfell, whom Tyrion had once comforted on the King's Road, stood before him as king in the north. Their reunion was quiet but warm. Two outcasts who had survived the world by embracing truth in different ways. Jon brought news of the White Walkers, of the army of the dead marching from beyond the wall. Tyrion listened with skepticism, but not disbelief. Jon's sincerity was unwavering. Daenerys reacted with caution. Tyrion mediated, reawakening the diplomatic instincts that had once made him the sharpest mind in King's Landing. He arranged the meeting in the Dragonglass Caves. He helped Jon navigate Daenerys' temper. He urged compromises neither fully accepted. But the threat from the north changed everything when Jon's party embarked on a doomed mission to capture a Whiter's proof. Daenerys, racing to their rescue, lost Viserion, a dragon brought down by the Night King's spear. Tyrion felt the Queen's grief like a physical blow. The dragons were her children. Their loss was a warning. Fire could not conquer everything. When Daenerys and Jon returned, united by shared trauma, Tyrion saw a new bond forming between them, one that unsettled him. He feared Daenerys would lose herself in attachment. He feared Jon would lose himself in loyalty. The battle against the Night King at Winterfell brought temporary unity, but it left Tyrion haunted. He watched Daenerys grow increasingly isolated, her council thinning, her trust fading. Jorah died. Missandei was captured. When Cersei had Missandei beheaded on the walls of King's Landing, Daenerys' last threads of restraint frayed. Missandei's final word, Dracarys, ignited a fuse no one could put out. Tyrion begged Daenerys to spare King's Landing. He pleaded with her to wait for the bells, for surrender, for mercy. Daenerys heard him, but hearing was not the same as agreeing. When the final campaign began, Tyrion made one last desperate attempt at peace. He freed Jaime, risking execution, and urged him to help Cersei escape. Tyrion knew he was betraying Daenerys by doing it. He also knew he was betraying the small voice of honor Tywin once beat into him. but he could not watch another city burn. Tyrion's gamble failed. King's Landing fell swiftly, Daenerys' armies overwhelming the defences. The bells rang in surrender. Soldiers dropped their swords. Civilians fled into alleys. And in that moment, the moment Tyrion believed the city would be spared, Daenerys made her choice. She mounted Drogon. She looked to the Red Keep, and she burned the city. Flames roared, buildings collapsed. Ash filled the air in choking clouds. Men, women, and children died screaming beneath wings of fire. Tyrion wandered through the inferno in a state beyond horror. He saw corpses charred into blackened statues. He saw families crushed beneath rubble. He saw soldiers fleeing in terror as Drogon carved fiery paths through streets. Everything Tyrion feared Daenerys might become, she became. When the ashes settled, the smell of death lingered. Tyrion walked through the remains of the Red Keep, searching for his siblings. He found Jaime and Cersei buried beneath collapsed stone, their fingers entwined even in death. He cried, for them, for himself, for the kingdom that had burned because he had believed he could guide a queen with dragons. The act that followed sealed his fate. Tyrion removed the hand of the queen's pin and threw it at Daenerys' feet, rejecting her rule, her war, her vision. Her Unsullied seized him instantly. Tyrion was a prisoner once more, a man trapped in his own failures, betrayed not by those he trusted, but by his own hope. He waited in a cold cell, haunted by fire and the ghosts of those he could not save. Tyrion Lannister waited in silence as the ashes of King's Landing settled over the ruins like snow. The cell that held him was cramped, lit by a single torch whose flame seemed too weary to stand upright. The stone was cold. The air tasted of smoke and grief. Hours passed without measure, days blurred. Tyrion stared into darkness and replayed every decision, every miscalculation, every plea Daenerys had ignored. He had believed he could guide her. He had believed his counsel mattered. He had believed he was saving the realm. But the charred bodies in the streets outside told a different story. When Jon Snow finally appeared outside Tyrion's cell, the candlelight caught the hollowed exhaustion in his eyes. Jon had ridden with Daenerys, bled beside her, pleaded with her, and still watched the city burn. The two men who had once survived Winterfell's cold now faced a different kind of winter, the ruin left by a conqueror's fire. Tyrion stood, every bone aching. The chains on his wrists rattled. Jon hesitated before speaking. Daenerys, she sees it as a necessity. Tyrion studied him, recognizing the conflict tearing Jon apart. Honor at war with loyalty. Duty battling love. The same war Jaime had fought his whole life. The same war that had destroyed so many. Tyrion's voice was hoarse, but his mind was sharper than ever. He urged Jon to see the plain truth. Daenerys believed her. Destiny was righteous, and the righteousness of destiny was the most dangerous belief a ruler could carry. A tyrant who knows they are cruel can be negotiated with. A tyrant who believes they are good cannot. Jon wanted to deny it. Tyrion watched the struggle in his eyes. He pressed harder. He spoke of Varys, who had died because he saw what Tyrion had failed to see soon enough. He spoke of Missandei's death, of the bells of surrender that Daenerys had ignored. He painted the future vividly, a world where Daenerys' justice would continue to burn city after city if anyone refused her vision. Tyrion didn't ask Jon to kill her. He simply asked Jon to open his eyes. Finally, Tyrion asked the question that cracked Jon's defenses. What about your sisters? Jon flinched. Tyrion did not need to say more. When Jon left, Tyrion was alone again. alone with the knowledge he had forced Jon Snow into a choice that would shape the fate of the realm. Tyrion waited in the darkness, heart pounding, hoping Jon's moral compass would bend toward courage and fearing it would break under love. The moment of Daenerys' death was not seen by Tyrion, but he felt it. A shift in the air, a silence settling over the keep. Footsteps thundered through the corridors. Shouts echoed off stone. And when Grey Worm entered Tyrion's cell, his face carved into hardened fury, Tyrion understood instantly that Jon had done what Tyrion could not. The Queen was dead. Tyrion was dragged from the cell in chains, paraded through the remnants of the Red Keep. The sky above was grey, the ruins still smouldering. Unsullied soldiers glared at him with cold hatred. He passed charred streets where collapsed buildings still hissed with rising heat. He stepped through the courtyard where Daenerys had once stood triumphant. Now it was empty. Tyrion was taken to the Dragon Pit, the vast ruin where dragons had once been chained. Now it would serve as the meeting place for the shattered realm. Lords and ladies gathered in circles, their garments torn, faces stained with smoke. They argued, shouted, accused, pleaded. The kingdoms of Westeros had been burned apart, and now, in the ashes, those who remained sought some path forward. Grey Worm thrust Tyrion into the centre of the circle. Jon Snow was brought forward as well, a prisoner like Tyrion. Neither man looked victorious. Neither man looked saved. Both carried the weight of Daenerys' death on their shoulders, one for doing it, the other for forcing the choice. The discussion that followed was chaotic. The lords argued about succession, vengeance, justice, punishment. They debated Jon's fate. Execution, exile, or war. The Unsullied demanded blood. The North demanded mercy. No one agreed on anything. And then Tyrion spoke. Even in chains, his voice commanded attention. He reminded them that kings chosen by blood had failed the realm. Mad kings, child kings, cruel kings, weak kings. He proposed something unthinkable, that rulers should be chosen by the lords of Westeros, not born to it. A council, not a coin toss of lineage and luck. He pointed to Bran Stark, the boy who had fallen from a tower, crossed through madness, survived as something no longer quite human. Bran, with his strange calm and distant gaze, represented memory, neutrality, and the knowledge of the entire past. A king not of ambition, but of understanding. Tyrion made the case with clarity sharpened by everything he had seen, and to his astonishment, and perhaps to his horror, the lords agreed. Bran Stark would be king. Grey Worm nearly drew his blade. Sansa's eyes narrowed with suspicion, Arya with guarded skepticism. But the council had spoken, and Bran, serene and distant, accepted the crown. Tyrion waited for punishment. After all, he had advised Daenerys. He had betrayed her. He had freed Jaime. He had pushed Jon toward regicide. Fire and death followed him everywhere he walked. Bran looked at him with the unblinking calm of someone who saw every thread of Tyrion's life woven across time. And he sentenced Tyrion not to death, which would have been mercy, but to a lifetime of work. You will be my hand. The words cut deeper than any blade. Tyrion had once revelled in the title. Now it felt like penance, a lifetime spent fixing the realm he had helped break. A lifetime of trying to build, not destroy. A lifetime of responsibility without glory. Jon Snow was sent to the Night's Watch, a compromise to appease both the Unsullied and the North. Tyrion felt the injustice of it keenly, but Jon accepted the sentence with the quiet solemnity that defined him. They exchanged a final look, two men bound by tragedy. When Tyrion returned to the small council chamber, The table rebuilt, the seats empty. He felt the vastness of the task ahead. He filled the chairs with people who could rebuild Westeros. Brienne, Davos, Samwell, Bronn, and others who could balance strength with compassion, knowledge with experience. Bronn bickered. Brienne spoke with duty. Sam thickened the air with hopeful optimism. Davos steadied the table with truth. Tyrion sat at the head, no longer drunk, no longer sneering, no longer hiding behind wit to shield a wounded soul. He was weary, scarred, guilty, and wiser than he had ever been. But though he had regained the position of hand, he had not regained what mattered most. He was still alone. He wandered the halls of the Red Keep, halls marked forever by both Lannister triumph and Targaryen ruin. He visited the ruins of the throne room, looked upon the melted stone that once held the Iron Throne, and felt the breath of history on the back of his neck. He wondered if he had made the right choices. He wondered if he ever would. He wondered whether redemption was possible, or if it was just a story told to comfort children. Yet he remained Hand, and he remained determined. Tyrion Lannister's life had carried him from Casterly Rock's shadows to the Wall, to the Eyrie, to Blackwater, to the dungeons of the Red Keep, to the Great Pyramid of Meereen, and now back again to King's Landing, a city rebuilt from ashes. Everywhere he went, he left scars. Everywhere he went, he carried them with him. But unlike kings, queens, conquerors, or mad tyrants, Tyrion survived, not through strength, not through beauty, not through birthright, but through the one thing he had always possessed, even when the world denied him everything else, his mind. And for the first time, that mind was in service not to a family, not to a throne, not to ambition, but to the fragile hope that the world, broken as it was, could still be repaired. Tyrion closed the door to the small council chamber, took his seat, and prepared to begin. The last lion in Westeros was not roaring. He was building.